Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. It's such an honor, as always, to be here and witness the spectacle and delight that is Tuesday Group. As always, a big thanks to Lacey for leading with grace and humor and efficiency. So I am Ingrid Lyons. I'm the executive director of Save the Boundary Waters and its parent organization, Northeastern Minnesotans for Wilderness. I've been with the organization for about 10 years. I began my role as the Northeast Regional Organizer, spending my time in Duluth and in Ely. Just by a little bit of background about me, aside from my 10 years at the organization, I'm actually from New York City originally, born and raised in New York City, but my dad's Minnesotan. And so every summer we would drive from Brooklyn, New York, drive from population 8 million to Ely, Minnesota, starting when I was 4 years old. And so it really, from a very early point in my life, taught me that wild places are everywhere, but there is a beautiful range and diversity of what wild places look like, what nature looks like. I loved my park in Brooklyn, and of course loved the Boundary Waters. So it really was a very formidable experience for me, and I've lived in Minnesota since 2011 at this point, and have a spot off the Echo Trail on Big Lake. So there's a lot of familiar faces in the room. I'm so grateful to each and every one of you, whether I've met you before or not, for being here today. If you support our organization, really, really so much gratitude. This work is truly not possible without each and every one of you. I've held sort of three roles in this organization: one as an organizer on the ground, one as a development person, so fundraising, and then now in leadership. And no matter what department I go to, what role I have, I am constantly humbled and deeply grateful for the people who are so passionate about protecting America's canoe country. So I wanted to start with a big thank you. I would also like to take just a second to acknowledge the absolutely horrific events of this past weekend. Speaker Emerita Hortman was a wonderful leader. She was impactful. She was kind. Our team had many opportunities to interact with her, whether through door knocking or, just kind of out in the community. So it's hitting a lot of folks really hard. And so I just wanted to create some space to say that we are mourning and grieving the loss of Speaker Emerita Hortman, and obviously condemn the violence, and have our hearts and minds are with the folks who have experienced the trauma of feeling like their lives were threatened while this person was still on the loose. So shan't dwell, but wanted to leave some space for that. Oh, right. So you all know this. You all know where we are. You all know, how wonderful canoe country is. But I just what we wanted to do today is twofold. It's been a really, really busy time for Save the Boundary Waters, to say the least. And so what we'll be doing today in this presentation is, first, I'll be recounting my trip to Washington, D.C. last week, because by pure coincidence, a tremendous amount happened last week, and we happened to be, in the rooms where it happened. So I think that's just something good for everybody to know and understand. And it helps us all understand kind of where we are in this effort right now. And then I'm going to hand it over to Becky, because there are a few topics on this issue where it seems that there's kind of a discrepancy in understanding. And what we'd love to be able to facilitate is people feeling comfortable and like they are empowered with the information that, really fuels our effort. Since the very beginning, our organization has prioritized good, peer-reviewed, thorough information, factual information, economics, science, culture, public opinion. That is something that really was sort of the bedrock of our work. And so we're going to go through a few points of sort of confusion and clarification, and then leave some time for a bit of discussion or Q&A at the end. So we'll go quickly, but hopefully not too quickly. So as you're well aware, 4.3 million acres is what's at risk from proposed sulfide or copper mining in the headwaters of the Rainy River watershed. We also call it the Boundary Waters watershed. This watershed contains the Boundary Waters, also feeds Quetico Provincial Park, as well as Voyageurs National Park. And altogether, from an acreage standpoint, this is about 4.3 million acres of continuous freshwater ecosystem, which is an increasingly rare treasure to have, and we are so fortunate to have it in our backyards. Our goal as an organization, so Save the Boundary Waters was founded about 10 years ago, a little bit longer at this point, and our goal has always been and will remain a permanent ban on sulfide ore mining in the headwaters of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, the Rainy River headwaters. So a permanent ban is what we are after. Updates on the federal level. So this is a little bit of where we are right now. The sort of 30,000 foot view is that the 20-year mining ban is threatened and may be reversed, and it's threatened through a few different avenues, legislative and executive. We were in DC just last week, and so from a legislative perspective, what concerns us is HR 978, which is legislation that has been introduced by Representative Pete Stauber. This legislation would overturn the 2023 20-year copper mining ban on federal lands in the Rainy River headwaters. It would force the issuance of not 2, but 4 federal mineral leases for Twin Metals, Minnesota, with extremely favorable lease terms, a 70-year term, and reinstate applications for prospecting permits. It would also prohibit judicial review, which I think sets an extremely dangerous precedent for public lands across our country, but just that's part of this. It would also require completion of environmental review of a mine plan of operation within 18 months and permitting within 6 months thereafter, basically putting this copper mine on a fast track to development. In addition to that legislative threat, there have been a few executive actions in the form of 3 presidential executive orders, 2 secretarial orders, and suspension of relevant legal opinions. So the presidential orders are those that have been signed since January 20th that impact recent Boundary Waters protections by declaring a national emergency, prioritizing mining on federal public lands across the country, and directing rapid approval of priority mining projects. The secretarial order was signed by Interior Secretary Burgum to implement that executive order, and the suspension of legal opinions applied to all Interior Department legal opinions throughout the Biden administration. So from 2020 to 2024, including the opinion on the unlawful issuance of the 2 mineral leases in the Superior National Forest. Those leases were canceled in 2022. So what were we doing in DC? You may have seen some news coverage, but we went to Washington, DC with the hope and effort around removing bad Boundary Waters language from the reconciliation package. So we've been working on this really hard because it's the language in the reconciliation bill was particularly harmful. It did a lot of the same things as Representative Stauber's legislation, but actually gave the perpetual rights of renewal to Twin Metals for their federal mineral leases, perpetual meaning forever, without public input and no Forest Service approval and no environmental review. So this basically was the bill, but worse. Reconciliation, for those of you who are perhaps unfamiliar, reconciliation is essentially, where are we going to get the dollars to facilitate an administration's, priorities? So different committees on both the House side and the Senate side are given instruction. Hey, you need to save or generate, this much money for the federal coffers. Bills and language that go into these bills have to be revenue oriented. They have to be fiscal, not policy. They're not meant to, materially affect policy. And so we went to DC armed with arguments because the language, the Boundary Waters language that had made its way into the House reconciliation bill was policy. it really did not have enough of a budgetary impact to be justifiable within the bill. And under something called the Byrd Rule, it did not apply. So the Byrd Rule is something that applies to the Senate. It's basically that rule that where you look at things and say, is it policy? Is it fiscal? And then that's kind of what determines if provisions remain in the bill or not. That's something that happens on the Senate side. Someone called a parliamentarian looks at everything that's been proposed on the House side and says, you know, this can stay in, this can't. They look at all the arguments, they have debates with leadership. And that's how things tend to get in and out of the bill. So we went to DC beginning of last week with the simple goal of getting Boundary Waters language out of House reconciliation. So got there on Monday, had a great day of meetings on Tuesday. The Boundary Waters language was stripped from the reconciliation bill. Yay. So we were really thrilled because leading up to the trip, we'd been working pretty much exclusively on this reconciliation effort. And on Tuesday, June 10th, the House Rules Committee basically released adjustments to the big, beautiful bill. And section 80131, which is the Boundary Waters section, was struck from the bill. So you'll see there's a just straight up strike 80131. And we weren't sure if they were going to perhaps strike just parts of it, maybe the barring of judicial review, since that's the sort of clearest impact on directly on policy. So we were really thrilled to see that the entire provision was struck. Why did this happen? You know, there's a lot of different things that go into that. The Byrd Rule, the arguments around, you know, whether this language, you know, belonged in this type of bill or not. But also there were great champions on the Hill, like Senator Tina Smith, who really was vehemently against the inclusion of this language in reconciliation on the Senate or House side. But what about the Senate? So the Senate has to basically go through the same process. Their committees also have to put forward proposed language for their version of the big, beautiful bill. And so the Environment and Natural Resources Committee on the Senate side, we were waiting to see their language. You know, there was a chance that even though it got stripped on the House side, that the Senate would decide to keep that language in or some version of that language in. Senator Mike Lee from Utah, you know, has really been championing massive public land sell-offs in Nevada and Utah and the West. And so we were not sure if we would be sort of part of that conversation. So they did release their reconciliation bill text, and lo and behold, the bad Boundary Waters language was not in the Senate language. So that was another victory. So no reconciliation. We had worked tremendously hard with our partners, with our champions on the Hill, and others. And so just a lot of gratitude for anyone who's sort of been tracking that and paying attention, doing outreach, because it was a huge effort and candidly not one that we were certain we were going to be able to prevail in. So I went to the airport on Wednesday. I said, okay, bon voyage, I'm gonna go home. And I was sitting in a restaurant in Reagan and someone says, hey, did you see this this tweet? And I closed my laptop, I got in a car and I went back to DC because Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, moments after the Senate released its language, tweeted, Secretary Burgum and I have been working together to unleash American energy, and today we are taking another step to ensure we are getting back in the mining and energy development game. Today, USDA is proud to announce that we are initiating the process to cancel the mineral withdrawal in the Rainy River watershed on the Superior National Forest. After careful review, including extensive public input, the U.S. Forest Service has enough information to know the withdrawal was never needed. We look forward to working with Secretary Burgum to pursue American energy dominance and reverse the costly and disastrous policies of the Biden administration. So celebrations were cut short. Thank you, Secretary Rollins. So I want to help people kind of understand what's in this loaded tweet and why it sort of has pivoted everything one way or another. So, proud to announce that we are initiating the process to cancel the mineral withdrawal. The mineral withdrawal is the 20-year ban that was put in place in 2023 by then Interior Secretary Deb Haaland. These are the protections on 225,504 acres in the watershed that say no copper mining, no sulfide ore mining in this place for 20 years. That was a huge victory that many of you were a critical part of. Thank you. You know, this fight has ups and downs, and it's important to remember that, you know, it's not all for nothing. It's all very much for something. So thank you for being part of that process. After careful review, including extensive public input, the U.S. Forest Service has enough information to know the withdrawal was never needed. This part is the most confusing, in my opinion, of this tweet, because the secretary says they are both initiating process and have already concluded a process and made a determination. To our knowledge, there has been no public input process that led up to this tweet. The only public input that we are aware of is public input that many of you were a part of, when 675,000 Americans over the course of 8 years, over the course of many, many, many opportunities to speak out on this issue, weighed in. And over 95% of that 675,000 group said, we don't want this mining near the boundary waters. They were against it. And so we'd be very curious to see what public input they gathered and what they're referring to. The other portion of that is that, you know, the withdrawal, they have enough information to know the withdrawal was never needed. As recently as December of 2024, the U.S. Forest Service actually reaffirmed its position that these mineral leases didn't belong in the watershed of the boundary waters. The U.S. Forest Service has a unique role in Minnesota and Wisconsin, where they actually have the right, they have to consent. The Forest Service has the right to consent or deny leases. On multiple occasions, the Forest Service has denied leases, or not given their consent, sorry. That record is extremely clear. So we wonder what happened between December and June. Further, the study that went into the mineral withdrawal was an extremely robust study, and the conclusion of which was fairly clear, actually very clear, that this ecosystem, this place, is fundamentally the wrong place for sulfide ore copper mining. Finally, we look forward to working with Secretary Burgum to pursue American energy dominance, reverse the costly and disastrous policies of the Biden administration. Just as a friendly reminder, Twin Metals is a wholly owned subsidiary of Chilean mining conglomerate Antofagasta. This is not an issue about American energy dominance. It's selling out America's public lands, which belong to all of you, all of us, to a foreign billionaire. So we thought that it would be helpful to just take a few steps back to remind ourselves, why did we get to the withdrawal? Why is the withdrawal not only necessary, but proven? Why is, you know, what makes the record so clear? What have been the results of years and years and years of conversation? First, mining companies seek to mine on public land. So like I just said, federal public lands belong to all Americans. State public lands belong to all Minnesotans. And the Rainy River headwaters is managed for scenic recreation. Just in sort of the ground zero of this project alone, hundreds of homes and 30 businesses are there. Mining companies, especially foreign-owned mining companies, have no right or entitlement to federal public lands in Minnesota or to Minnesotan public lands. And this was actually particularly interesting. So I stayed in DC because there was a House Natural Resources Committee hearing where folks in that committee were questioning Interior Secretary Burgum about appropriations for the Department of Interior. But so everybody, every member gets 5 minutes to ask questions of the secretary. Representative Stauber used his 5 minutes to have the secretary commit to canceling the withdrawal and giving leases back to the company. He also admitted that he called Secretary Rollins before this tweet happened. So, you know, if we're creating policy about public lands with one lawmaker making one call to a cabinet member and then them tweeting about it, public lands are in a tough spot. But a different lawmaker from New Mexico asked a line of questions to Interior Secretary Burgum, and he agreed that he does not believe that foreign mining companies should be mining on America's public lands. He said no. He said he's committed to that not being the case. And so I think that's important to note, that even Interior Secretary Burgum has that in mind. Sulfide ore copper mining would risk 4 protected areas. So this isn't a mine in the middle of nowhere. There's 4 different wild spaces that all have different, protective designations, including wilderness, which is the highest level of land protection that you can have in the US. Further, 80% of the boundary waters itself is actually in the downstream half of Rainy River headwaters. So when you talk about putting a mine where this mine is proposed, you're not only influencing the most immediate area, but several different spots that have been designated as long ago as 1909 by Teddy Roosevelt. This is our water flow map that we use. Some people don't think that water flows north of the Laurentian Divide, but we all know well that it does. And part of our primary concern is, that these, is this a pointer? I don't know. Oh, yeah. That these proposals are in an area where the water flows down, will pick up that pollution and bring it right back through the core of the wilderness, up to Quetico, to Voyageurs, and onward. Y'all know how interconnected those waters are. So all 4 of these areas are really at risk. The record is clear. Rainy River headwaters is the wrong place for sulfide ore copper mining. Federal agencies that manage the Superior National Forest, boundary waters, and federal minerals have said no to mining in this place several times. The U.S. Forest Service said no in 2016, 2022, and 2024. The BLM said no in 2016 and 2023. The Department of Interior said no in 2023. So, there is consensus. There has been consensus based on this robust record that's been built. These decisions were based on science, including the comprehensive environmental assessment that I mentioned earlier. And I think it's important, there's sort of talk of let the science speak. Let's look at the facts. Let's take a deep look at the science. That has happened. That has happened. So this is the withdrawal area that is proposed for being overturned. Everything that's kind of in gold here represents where the federal government manages both the land and the subsurface, and where sulfide ore copper mining is currently banned. This is the entire area that would be, once again, open to sulfide ore copper mining if indeed the administration or the legislative body moves forward with the bill or the action to overturn the withdrawal. And to get to that place, in 2022, there was an environmental assessment that studied copper mining in this area and found that the Rainy River headwaters would be at severe risk from sulfide ore copper mining if it were allowed in the unprotected upstream half. Pollution of the boundary waters, importantly, could not be mitigated or fixed. And a ban was necessary to protect and preserve water quality, scenic integrity, important wildlife corridors, and high quality recreation values. And just to give you a sense of how robust this study was, if you see it in person, it's about 1 foot high. I mean, it's really, really thick. These are all of the additional reports that were attached to that study. I think there's probably over 20, off the top of your head, Becky, like 25, something like that, ish. Over 20 additional reports that looks into each of these different issues and analyzes if sulfide ore copper mining, a ban on sulfide ore copper mining are necessary to protect the resource. And the result was yes. Yes, it did. Until recently, you could find this whole environmental assessment online, which is typical practice for the federal government. It's no longer there. Holler if you'd like a copy. So all that is to basically say, we wanted to, where we are right now is we're in a weird spot. In the past, what we've dealt with is looking towards, federal government records, looking at the Federal Register for announcements by the administration. And here, like I said, we're litigating public lands on X. That's bad news. And so we remain vigilant both in the legislative space, but we're going to be tracking, obviously, developments at the executive level. And we just really want to understand, I think, I think when you're not more frequently reminded and it's not maybe top of mind, the amount of work that has gone into understanding whether or not this is a suitable environment for sulfide ore copper mining is enormous. So much has gone into it. And so to be able to wipe it away with a single callous, misspelled tweet is unacceptable. And I'm now going to hand it over to Becky to talk a little bit about some key sort of informational sticking points that we've observed lately, just so that we can all really get a collective understanding and feel empowered to talk about this issue with our friends, our family, our neighbors, and then we'll open up for a little bit of Q&A and discussion. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to pick it up here. I wanted to address sort of the conversation that's been going on in the public arena, where there have been certain claims that have left me a little puzzled. And so let's talk about those claims and let's talk about facts in reality. So one claim I've read time and time again is, hey, don't worry, there's just one underground mine, not a big deal. Well, in fact, 5 mines are proposed in the Rainy River headwaters. Here's a listing of the 5 mines. Spruce Road deposit. That's Twin Metals seeks to develop it. A mine plan for the Spruce Road deposit was produced by Duluth Metals, its prior owner, in 2010, showing it as an open pit. The second mineralized deposit is Maturi. Maturi is the one that we've seen most often. It's the one that Twin Metals seeks to develop first. It would be an underground mine. Across Birch Lake from Maturi is Maturi Southwest. That would be an open pit mine as identified in a 2014 report by Duluth Metals. Further south is the Birch Lake deposit underneath Birch Lake, an underground mine. And then to the west is the Mesaba, now called Sunrise deposit, which would be a giant open pit. This is where the Maturi mine would be. That's South Kooshwee River coming in. The Boundary Waters is up here on the horizon. Gabbro, Bald Eagle, South Kooshwee River. This is the South Kooshwee, and this is Birch Lake. These are the 5 mines. So Spruce Road right here, less than a mile from the Boundary Waters border. Maturi Southwest, Birch Lake, and then Mesaba Sunrise, which is now part of the New Range joint venture. And for those who need it even in a bigger format, here we go. All 5 of the mines and their location within the Rainy River headwaters. So when we talk about a mining complex converting the Rainy River headwaters into a mining district, this is what we're referring to. A peer-reviewed modeling by Dr. Tom Myers that was published in the prestigious Journal of Hydrology documented that sulfate from an underground Maturi mine would flow north into the Boundary Waters. So even though some people think that an underground mine might be benign, in fact, underground mines aren't benign, just as open pits aren't. This shows the path of pollution that Dr. Myers in his peer-reviewed study showed. So this would be the Maturi mine. And this is South Kooshwee River, Birch Lake, going north through the White Iron chain of lakes into Fall Lake and north from there. And that's the flowage of water through the Boundary Waters, Quetico, and onto Voyagers, and then north to Hudson Bay. I've seen recently comments, actually for a while, that the Maturi mine, or the mines, all of them, would not be acid generating mines. The EPA has determined that the rock of the Duluth complex has the inherent capacity to generate acid. Studies have shown that the Maturi deposit itself has higher levels of acid generating potential than the other deposits. The DNR has done long-term kinetic testing, which is basically humidity tests of samples from the Kawishwe intrusion, which is in the area we're talking about. And it is shown that at 800 weeks, which is 15 years, what starts off as neutral turns acidic. So the problem couldn't sit there for a long time before you realize and see the evidence of acid mine drainage. But the pollution goes beyond acid mine drainage. Heavy metals, high levels of sulfate as well as sulfite are all contained in these ore bodies. And then finally, the DNR itself said that Twin Metals had not substantiated its claim that its tailings stockpile would not be acid mine generating. We have abundant science that documents the harm to water quality, wildlife, ecosystem impacts, and wilderness character sulfate or copper mining were allowed in the Rainy River headwaters. But I also wanted to talk about water quality monitoring. What's going on right now, and what can we learn from monitoring? We have now 3 staff people here in Ely whose job is to do water quality monitoring of the Rainy River headwaters all year round. Our monitoring started in 2020. We wanted to find out what was going on in the watershed. And I'll show you in a map format what's going on. All of our water quality monitoring is deposited in the database for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. The EPA has said that our water quality monitoring program is the best water quality program by any nonprofit in the Great Lakes region. And because of our work, Birch Lake has now been listed as impaired for sulfate. So what the water quality monitoring does is shows this. There are 2 taconite mines in the Rainy River headwaters. One is the Duncan mine. Now the Duncan mine's been closed since 1994. The Duncan mine was built where the Duluth complex overlaid taconite ore. And to get at the taconite ore, sulfide-bearing ore of the Duluth complex had to be pushed to the side. Most of it is on the east side of the Duncan mine. Some of it's on the west side. And what we found is that it is a highly polluting waste rock pile. Significant in and of itself, but a fraction of the piles that would exist if we had 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 copper nickel mines in the Rainy River headwaters. The second taconite mine is the Peter Mitchell mine, which is a modern operating taconite mine in Minnesota. In 2016, the continental pillars were removed and the mine was expanded from outside the Rainy River headwaters to inside the Rainy River headwaters. And we found that the Peter Mitchell mine is also polluting the Rainy River headwaters. The pollution from these 2 mines reaches the boundary waters. So this is a map. It's hard to read. We couldn't figure out how to get this big for you, but I have it here with me. So if anybody wants to look at this afterwards, I'd be happy to go over it with you. What you see on this map, oops, let's see. This is the Peter Mitchell mine. You can see where it crossed the Laurentian Divide in 2016 to extend into the watershed. The Duncan mine is over here, now closed. what would you call that, fuchsia? Those are the mineralized deposits that we talked about earlier for copper nickel. So the Mesaba deposit would be right here. This is Birch Lake, Maturi Southwest, Maturi, and Spruce Road. I point those out because those are a lot closer to the boundary waters than the Peter Mitchell pit. Pollution from the Peter Mitchell pit is documented here. There are little teeny numbers down there, but they all exceed Minnesota's standards for sulfate in wild rice lakes. This is on the Dunka River that flows into Birch Lake here. This is the Dunka mine, and that flows into Bob Bay here. The distance from the Peter Mitchell pit to the boundary waters is 35 miles. The distance from the mouth of the Dunka River to the boundary waters is 28 miles. The distance from Bob Bay is 23 miles. Birch Lake exceeds the 10 milligram part per liter wild rice standard for sulfate standard for wild rice lakes. Coming off the toe of the leach of the rock piles right here at Duncan Pit, you're going to find readings over 1,000 parts per million. So significant exceedances. We monitor all the tributaries, so we know what non-mining impact sulfate is in the wilderness. And that's important, or not in the wilderness, in the Rainy River headwaters, because we need to know up here, when it gets into the boundary waters, if we've exceeded what's called background, which is non-mining impact sulfate levels. And what we find is that here at Fall Lake in the wilderness, we have a 50% exceedance in sulfate. Now, why does that matter? Well, it matters because pollution is bad, but it also matters because it's against the law. The boundary waters is listed as in a category of standing resource value waters where zero pollution is allowed. And unfortunately, our regulatory agencies are not controlling the pollution from these two taconite. And although we lean heavily on our regulatory agencies, we need to be mindful of the limitations in this area and what is now happening. There's a claim that when the Forest Service prepared its detailed environmental assessment starting from 2021 and finishing in December of 2022, that they only used data from old mines, and that wasn't fair. That old mines we know pollute, but modern mines don't. In March, the state agencies received a peer-reviewed study of 8 modern mines. And the data from those 8 modern mines show that all mines pollute, period. So this looked at 8 modern mines that were permitted after 1990 under modern mining regulations. It found that all of them degraded surface water quality, that 7 of them degraded groundwater. There was insufficient data from the 8th to know if it was all 8. It found that at 6 of the mines, the outcomes were significantly worse than predictions. In other words, those mines, the mining companies for those mines predicted no degradation or limited degradation. And in reality, after the mines were operating, they all significantly exceeded those predictions and degraded water quality. And at least 4 of them underestimated the potential for acid nitration. Modern mines in America today. There has been a peer-reviewed study of all hard rock mines in the United States, comparing predictions to outcomes. And if the mine was located near surface water or groundwater, roughly 9 out of 10 times, the outcomes are significantly worse than the predictions. But I've also seen, well, if you review a Twin Metals mine plan, and actually Julie Lucas alluded to this a couple of weeks ago, you could find that it was not acid generating and everything would be fine. Well, oftentimes that is what happens. There's environmental review, there's permitting, a mining company says zero degradation, and then it turns out they end up polluting. In 2019, when Twin Metals had two what were found to be unlawful mineral leases on federal public lands in the Superior National Forest, it submitted to the DNR and the BLM its mine plan. So what happened? The mine plan ultimately was rejected. But before it was rejected, the DNR said, Twin Metals, you have not substantiated your claim that you're not going to produce acid mine drainage. You're not going to be able to put your tailings storage on state land, which is what you proposed. It had proposed using a 640-acre state land parcel immediately adjacent to Birch Lake to build a 438-acre tailings storage facility that would be 300 feet high. You could go skiing off it in winter. And the state said, you can't use our land because you are a limited liability company, Twin Metals, which means at the end of the day, you're not going to be around when we have to do cleanup, when we have to deal with this as a Superfund site. And because the state owns the land, the people of Minnesota will have to pay for expenses of cleanup because we know tailings piles are the most polluting part of the facility. So no, you can't use our land for your tailings. Twin Metals has said, and this was included in a geochemist's report that was in the Echo, we're going to use dry stack tailings technique. It's state of the art. It's wonderful. What it neglected to say was that the DNR has rejected dry stack tailings, which means you take the moisture out of the tailings to stack them up. Because guess what? It's wet here. We had what, 5 inches of rain last night? That big 300-foot stack poised on the shores of Birch Lake will be slopping into the lake right now. So it's rejected that technique for Minnesota. So BLM rejected the mine plan after it had for 2 years and couldn't move it forward to environmental review. And the DNR suspended the mine plan for the same reason. Some people say, well, we need this mine or these mines for the clean energy transition. The fact of the matter is, this is low-grade ore, less than 1% metal. And any output from these mines concentrate, number one, it's shipped to China, where Antofagasta uses low-cost smelters for smelting, and then it's sold on the world market. But so it's irrelevant to our national security, but it's so small that it really does not contribute to solving US demand for supplies. So the lovely graphic of digging it up in Minnesota, shipping it off to China, and then selling it back to us probably for a premium. So you're going to take over from here. Here's Ingrid. You got your little cookie?
I got my little cookie. I'll take your little cookie. Thank you. Oh, you do? I'm just speaking to my cookie.
Yeah, speaking to your thing.
Sorry.
One last thing. I brought a really good commentary that was in FinPost in 2021, written by Chris Baldwin, who is a mining engineer who lives in Hibbing, about this very issue, whether you should do sulfide or copper mining in the watershed. Mining engineer, he speaks that language. I have a couple of dozen copies of his excellent commentary, and I encourage you to take a copy if you'd like, and I'll put it right by Lacey's desk.
Great. And so we're doing a lot of stuff, obviously, busy times, and, I just really appreciate you all being here. And, the wilderness is a one-of-a-kind thing. And I know that I think where folks tend to potentially differ on this issue is risk tolerance. Because we are, really rooted in information, the information we have, the robust information we have points to this would be a tremendous mistake. And so our position is, let's not in 50 years wish we had done something differently. There are other ways to fuel the world, to build the things we need, to get more creative. There is only one Boundary Waters. There's only one canoe country. Wars will be fought over freshwater. So what we do now, I think, is extraordinarily important. And so I appreciate you all being here. And before we open it up to questions, I also just want to share, I want Gillian to be able to just jump up real quick and run through just a few quick opportunities that y'all can take advantage of to get involved locally in town.
Hello. Oh, I'm tall. Okay. I am Gillian, pronouns she, her, and I am the Northern Regional Organizer for Save the Boundary Waters. The Boundary Waters is the love of my life, but I didn't just move here because I love the Boundary Waters. I moved here because I love Ely too. So with that being said, our soonest opportunity to volunteer is that we will have a float in the 4th of July parade, which is super fun and an Ely staple. It's been around for almost 100 years, if not more. So if you're interested in helping prep for that, if you're creative and want to help decorate or have old 4th of July decorations that you want to get rid of, I want them. Reduce, reuse, 2 R's before, recycle that we forget. And if you're interested with marching with us in the parade, I'd love to have you. So some other things you could do to get involved with us are write letters to the editor for your local paper. Local politics is super important to kind of start at the bottom up. You can have meetings with your local politicians, and something that you could do that I can help set you up with is to contact Senator Hochschild. Email him, call him. He's pretty responsive, and I'd love to point you in the right directions of resources to get in touch with him. Small group presentations are something I like to do too. So if you have a group of people who would love to learn more, reach out to me and I would love to come talk to you. And just public support, like don't be afraid to say what you stand for and show other people too, like yard signs, t-shirts, and just speaking up for this place is more important now than ever. So yeah, I hope to see you around Ely and stand with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Gillian. We will now take questions.
We heard from this representative a couple of weeks ago that Twin Metals was not allowed to share their science, which would prove that they could do this. What is that all about?
Ellen, I don't know. It submitted its mine plan in 2019 to the regulatory agencies, where a 2-year process began to understand its mine plan. I think what Julie said was her bosses at Twin Metals wouldn't let them submit information. I believe that's what she said. But it's a big problem because it is hard to get information from mining companies. We know of several reports that they chose not to submit to the agencies that they probably should have. An important report on subsidence. But you'll have to ask them why they held back information on their mine plan.
Quick question for both of you. Ingrid, you mentioned something about the bad Boundary Waters language in the bill, and to be honest, I don't have a clue what that means. So think about that. And Becky, you know, we get a lot of statistics that are being taken. It would be really nice if and maps and things like that you can provide, if you made copies of those kinds of things and the statistics that talk about water quality in each of the affected areas and how that has fluctuated over the years since whenever we started taking statistics until now, and possibly projected future statistics. It'd be nice for me to walk home with that rather than just look at a map and try to guess when was that recent statistic taken. You know. That's about it.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry if I wasn't clear. The bad Boundary Waters language, section 80131 in reconciliation, was somewhat similar to Representative Stauber's HR 978 language, in that it would have overturned the 20-year copper mining ban, would have given 2 leases back to Twin Meadows that had been, their 2 unlawful leases, would have taken 2 preference right mineral lease applications and made those into leases that they gave to the company. So it would be a total of 4 leases that would be granted with really, generous terms, no environmental review, no public input, perpetual terms, rights to renewal. Great. For the materials, I think that's a great point. We were just sort of discussing how we can do better on sort of like sharing these and making sure people really, again, to that idea of like empowering people with information. We do really want to make sure that people feel like they have access and they know where to go and they know what to reference. So we'll continue to work on that, and we appreciate the feedback.
The sulfate data, if that's one of your questions, where do I find the data that was in this wonderful map? Okay, we have a library on our website that has a lot of studies in the library. Now, I realize that requires digging through that library to look at these scientific reports. We also have a summary of the science, which now is getting to be quite long because there's so much science. That's also on our website. That's a good resource. All of the data on our water quality monitoring is at the PCA and publicly available in their data bank. And I should have added one more thing. There has recently been a statistical analysis of our water quality data on sulfate. We monitor for a number of pollutants. We're using sulfate here for a couple of reasons. One, because we have that strict Minnesota standard for wild rice lakes, but also it's a conservative pollutant. And so, which can be transported into the boundary waters. We had a statistical analysis done of our data on sulfate in the Rainy River headwaters. And the statistician said there is a 99% certainty that the pollution that is entering the boundary waters is coming from the Duncan mine and the Peter Mitchell mine. And there really is no other source. I don't think that analysis is up on our website, but it's probably something that we will add to our library. And if there is more particular information that you can't find in those sources, let Ingrid or me know.
Ingrid, just a clarification on withdrawal. We got this tweet language. I've read some things in the paper. Is the rescission of the withdrawal official? And if so, what is their legal action to fight that?
So that's why we're just remaining vigilant to what the next steps are, because you can't, a tweet really doesn't hold the weight that official documents and decisions do. And so what's important to understanding options for litigation too, or what's the process that the administration is going to go through. There are bedrock environmental regulations and laws that theoretically need to be followed. And so just understanding, waiting to see until we have the resources to have a better understanding of their approach to undoing the withdrawal.
What's really important as we sit here today is to know right now the watershed is protected. That tweet didn't change anything. Mining is banned in the wilderness pursuant to the 1978 Boundary Waters Act and a state law in 1976. It also bans mining on a 220,000 acre mining protection area, which is the Echo Trail, Fernburg, Gunflint, and a swath around Trout Lake. Mining is banned for 20 years on all federal lands in the northern half of the Rainy River drainage basin. Nothing's changed. The law hasn't changed. The law requiring Forest Service consent exists today. That would have been overturned if that budget for these leases, if the budget reconciliation provision had not been stricken. But today we're in a good place, thanks to all of you, and it's up to us to make sure we stay in that good place.
Two questions. One, Stouterville is not part of the reconciliation process, so it's going to require majorities in both, actually super majorities in both houses, in both Senate and House. That's one point, which means we have a lot more potential to prevent that from happening. Second thing is though, as information continues to disappear from EPA websites, BLM websites, ECA websites, so whatever, are you, like, for example, that one report with the 20 or 20 some additional reports, is that all available on your library? Do you have the space and capacity to continue to load that out there?
I don't know if the EA is on our website, but it's on my computer and it's on Matt Norton's computer. So we've been downloading it. Anybody wants it? We've got it.
Yeah, we have always made a practice of, you know, making sure that any critical documents from the government, from companies, et cetera, are backed up and we have them. So if you do want to see them, please do let us know.
Before I get the last question, second to last question, I just want a quick note, next week's Tuesday group is breeding birds in Minnesota. Sorry for the,
Love that.
Okay, not really one question, but I just wonder where Canada is on all this. I mean, we're concerned from our side, but yet this is a boundary waters thing. I've wondered this forever and whether there's some international incident here. You can comment or not on that. Another claim that I have heard from friends in the Twin Cities is, oh, well, that's a local issue up there. You know, they should just be deciding that rather than recognizing this is a national treasure and international treasure. But that's another claim that I would say I have heard. Lastly, our representative and where we live, Peter Fisher, was heavily involved in Minnesota this last legislative session because they were looking to liberate the environmental regulations, loosen them, in part against fast track this mining thing. So there was a lot of horse trading and I'm not sure how that came out, but you know, we have the federal, but we also have the local, and if some of our state level regulations are gone, then we have another set of issues.
Becky's gonna talk Canada and I'm gonna talk state.
Okay, Canada. The United States and Canada have a treaty, 1909, a great year in our history because of the Quetico, the formation of the Superior, and the Boundary Waters Treaty, which governs the entire US-Canada border across the lower 48 and Alaska. That treaty has a really unusual provision in it. It says, we United States promise not to pollute the water of Canada, and there's a reciprocal promise. The treaty is managed by the International Joint Commission, which has an equal number of commissioners from the United States and from Canada. And we have engaged with the IJC and the Canadian government since the beginning of this campaign, last 10 years. The IJC works through watershed boards up and down the border. Ours is the International Rainy Lake of the Woods Watershed Board, which has been active on this issue and has encouraged the IJC to ask questions of the Secretary of State. See, it gets very convoluted when you're talking about international stuff, to be engaged. In December of 2018, the Trump administration issued a really skinny environmental assessment to renew 2 Twin Metals leases. It managed to do this immediately before the holidays at year end, during a partial government shutdown, while the BLM regional offices in Milwaukee were closed, making it really hard for the public to engage. Canada Global Affairs, the Canadian government, the big guys in Ottawa, sent a comment letter on a US environmental assessment on 2 mineral leases, expressing concern about cross-boundary impacts and cumulative impacts. Their letter was never answered. So they have expressed concern. The First Nation communities in Canada have weighed in. Lac La Croix First Nation wrote a letter. Lac La Croix First Nation. They're the first community that would be hit by pollution, their village up on Lac La Croix. They wrote a letter to the US Secretaries of Agriculture and Interior in 2016 saying, hey guys, we support a 20-year mineral withdrawal, a mining ban. Things are a little rocky right now with Canada. So I'm not sure that more
pressure from Canada would be well received in Washington DC, but they are concerned and they've been helpful in the past.
We're just about at time, so for the state issues, we did a sort of legislative wrap up. We have a blog about it. Essentially, we worked really hard to try to prevent the rollback of permitting reform and environmental regulations, and we ended up pretty well. We lost on one EAW petitioning issue, which I know that has a lot of terminology in it, but we do have a breakdown on a blog on our website. So happy to share that with you directly. But what's really important about the state level and what all of you can do is that if you care about environmental regulations and, you know, we say, oh yeah, we have the strongest stuff in Minnesota, it's been being peeled away slowly but surely over time. And so we need to put an end to it, because every year we lose a little something, and eventually we're gonna wake up one day and our regulations are gonna be pretty weak. So thank you again, everybody, so much for coming. Lacey, do you have anything you want to say?
I was just gonna represent an internet question, just one nuance. Is there any role for Governor Walz in all of this?
Yes, there is a role for Governor Walz. I mean, the state is our protective backstop. You know, if everything really falls apart at the federal level, it's the state that ultimately, you know, gives the permit to mine. So the state is a critical part of making this mine go or not. And so we need, as much as we need Congress to act, we need state leaders at home to act as well. Thanks for that question.
Thank you so much for joining us. The conversation will continue. Thank you, Becky and Ingrid. See y'all next week.